In this video, we're going to talk about some of the comma and semicolon rules that you will be applying in this lesson. Let's start with some comma usage. If you remember, we talked about independent clauses and dependent clauses in our last unit. This unit is going to have you explain, kind of bring that all back together again and see how the knowledge of clauses and phrases is going to help you in punctuation. So one of the first rules we have here is that we're going to use a comma between two independent clauses. An independent clause, if you recall from our last lesson, is a clause with a subject and a verb and a complete thought. We're going to join these two clauses with a fanboy. And what you have to remember for this rule is that the fanboy needs to connect these two complete sentences. And in order to do that, it needs to have a comma before it because it's not really strong enough to do it on its own. So let's take a look at this sentence. The cat escaped. He chased. All right, two independent clauses, right? The cat escaped from the house, then he chased the bird in our backyard. Two complete sentences joined by and. Therefore, I must have a comma right there. Okay, now let's move onward to the next rule. So let's do a quick review of that first rule, because that's an important rule. Remember we did the IC plus IC is compound, and a compound sentence needs a fanboy, but it also needs a plus a comma. All right, now in our next rule says that we're going to use a comma after an introductory word, phrase, or clause. And remember we learned in our last lesson the difference between a phrase and the clause. For this punctuation rule, though, it really doesn't matter if it's a phrase or a clause. As long as it's coming at the beginning of a sentence and it's more than 3 words, you need to separate it with a comma. Now, sometimes we also have single words that are called interrupters or transitions. Nevertheless, however, therefore, consequently, we always want to put a comma after those. And then again, if you look at the next example, we've got after all was said and done. That's an introductory word group, more than 3 words, so we need to separate it with a comma from the main clause. Linda's mother apologized is your main clause. So rule number 2, introductory word, phrase, or clause needs a comma. Now, this is an interesting one. We talked about adjectives in our last lesson when we did parts of speech. We have different types of adjectives. We're talking right now about what they call equal ranking adjectives. This basically means that the adjectives are equal in rank. They're not subordinate. So the way I think the easiest way to remember this is if you can change around the order of it. All right, so if you look at this example, I've got a spider, and the spider is big, furry, and creepy. All right, so he's big and furry and creepy. If the word and makes sense in the sentence, then you want a comma. that means I could change it around. I could say the furry, creepy, big spider. If you can change the order in these, they're equal adjectives. As opposed to little old lady. You couldn't say old little lady or you'd be changing the meaning of it. Or convenient telephone booth. Telephone booth has to go together, and convenient, you couldn't say convenient and telephone booth. So you want a comma between the equal ranking adjectives. Now we're also going to use a comma to enclose an appositive. Appositives are words that rename your subject. All right, so if you look at this one here, let's look at the second one first. My husband Bob loves to play golf. All right, Bob is the same as husband. I could say Bob, comma, my husband loves to play golf. You want to set this aside. Generally, one of the rules that you can remember with commas is a comma means that you can take something out of the sentence. So in essence, I could say my husband loves to play golf. Doesn't change the meaning of the sentence, does it? So if I put his name in there, it's renaming the husband. It's not necessary I put commas beside it. And I can also, let's take a look at this other one. The doctor, a man of great compassion, sat quietly by his patient. So now I've got the doctor. Now what's this? A man of great compassion talks about doctor, right? Can I take it out of the sentence? Can I say the doctor sat quietly by his patient? Still makes sense? Therefore, you need commas. Commas are generally show you that something is added that's not necessary to the meaning, so we put commas around it. Now we're also going to use commas to separate items in a date or an address. We don't ever want to have one to separate the zip code from the state. So if you look at this example, Diane was born on December 7th. We want one after 7. 1941, we need another comma after 1941 if the sentence continues. We're going to use commas to enclose sentence interrupters, including direct address. So if you look at this first example here, Joyce, please come here. That's a direct address. I'm talking to Joyce, so we want a comma after her name. First comma, turn on the oven. Second comma, if you're giving instructions. Those are all transitional elements. Basically, like the first rule, it comes at the beginning of a sentence and it's an interrupter. You want to put commas around it. You're going to use a comma to introduce a one-sentence quote. If the quote is more than one sentence, the basic rule says you should use a colon instead of a comma. So in this case, the politician promised, comma, I will not lower your taxes. You're going to use a comma to enclose a non-restrictive adjective clause. Now we'll talk a minute about this because it kind of touches on what we talked about before. Non-restrictive means it does not restrict the meaning of the sentence. And this is like the same rule we just went over when we talked about appositives. If you can take a clause out of a sentence and it does not alter the meaning of a sentence, you need to put commas around it. So look at this example. My English teacher, who is very tall, was elected president of the faculty senate. I can take who is very tall out, can't I? And I can say my English teacher was elected president of faculty senate. It still makes sense. So that's called a non-restrictive clause. Take it out of the sentence, doesn't affect the meaning of the sentence, you're good to go. Sometimes you're going to have items in a series. And a series is usually more than two. So what they're saying is you need a comma before conjunction when you're listing items in a series. This rule has changed. At one point they were teaching you could leave it off before the and. But I want you to look at this example. And let's kind of take a look at it and see what happens if you take that comma out. Uncle Joe died and left his money to Jim, Paul, and Tom. Now the way this is punctuated, this money is going to be divided three ways, right? Jim is going to get 1/3. Paul is going to get 1/3, and Tom is going to get 1/3. Now look what happens if I take that comma out. I'm going to take the comma out after Paul, and look at how the sentence changes meaning. So let me go here. Now what have I got? I'm going to leave the money to Jim, Paul, and Tom. So now how does it look? Jim is going to get 1/2, isn't he? Paul and Tom are going to lump together, and they're each going to get 1/4. So it does make a difference in meaning on whether or not that comma is there. So most English books today say leave the comma in to avoid misinterpretation. All right, we're going to do a little practice here. Let's look at where we would add commas in this sentence. Emily Dickinson, a famous American poet, was born in Amherst, Massachusetts on December 10th, 1830. Think about that for a minute. So you've got Emily Dickinson, a famous American poet. That's in the positive, right? Modifying Dickinson. And we got Amherst, Massachusetts. We've got a comma there between Amherst and Massachusetts. And then here we date. So that's what I would say for that. Let's see if it's right. We need one after Dickinson, after poet, after Amherst, and after December 10th. How about this one? When Emily's brother was several years old and Emily was 2 years of age, a third child, Lavinia, was born. Well, we've got when Emily's brother was 7 years old. That is an introductory word group, so we should put a comma there. And Emily was 2 years of age, comma. Emily was 2 years of age, complete sentence. A third child, and then they're going to name the child, Lavinia, was born. Let's see how that flies. Looks like we got it right. Emily's family was very traditional, and they lived in a big brick house. Got two complete sentences here, don't we? Independent clause, comma right there. Emily loved her family, so she did not want to go away to school. Complete sentence here. Emily loved, she did not want. I got a so here, I need a comma before it. Nevertheless, her father sent her to Holyoke Seminary for Girls. Nevertheless, comma, introductory word group. Emily stayed at the school for 2 semesters. Complete sentence. She came home because she was homesick. Complete sentence. We're going to stick a comma right there. So I do think we got those all right. All right, let's do some practice here. And this is, we got some run-ons from last time. I won't help him anymore, he doesn't study. Well, if we fix that, we're going to have to put a period here and start a new sentence. Or we could say because he doesn't study. Mother came from Canada, period. Dad came from Norway. I want to go to California, semicolon, before however, comma, after it. That will create 2 complete thoughts. Please bring the mayonnaise and mustard, semicolon. Ketchup and salt and pepper are already on the table. Now we'll talk a little about the semicolon here because it kind of goes with the comma. We're going to use a semicolon to connect 2 independent clauses. Before we've connected those 2 independent clauses with a comma and a conjunction or with a period. So Harry went diving in the Keys, complete sentence. He saw a 6-foot shark, another complete sentence. So the semicolon links these 2 complete sentences. It functions like a period, not a comma. Don't confuse a semicolon with a comma, you're going to get in trouble. We're going to use a semicolon with conjunctive adverbs. There's a bunch of conjunctive adverbs, and you can find a list anywhere online, but the most popular are however, consequently, therefore, and whereas. You cannot connect a sentence with a conjunctive adverb, connect two sentences with a conjunctive adverb unless you use a semicolon. Nick was captain of the football team. Complete thought. However, he broke his arm and had to sit out the season. Comma before it, after it, semicolon before it. If I had a comma here and not a semicolon, it would be a run-on sentence. So the conjunctive adverb cannot connect two complete sentences with only commas. You must have a semicolon. You want to never use a semicolon instead of a comma, or you will create a fragment, because a semicolon is like a period. Whatever comes before and after the semicolon must be complete. So let's call it a week period. All right, John wants to be an ice cream salesman. However, his wife thinks he needs higher goals in life. What do I need here? A comma's not going to make it. I need a semicolon. I could do a period, but we're going to do semicolons right now. Joe sells boats. Complete sentence. Therefore, he always has a nice new boat to play with. Semicolon before it, comma after it. Well, I hope this helped. This helped you a little bit in understanding how to use commas and semicolons in your writing. Thank you.